Hello guys, welcome to this week's video. The title of the chapter I will be discussing throughout this presentation is Assessment of Bilinguals, and it was written in 2011 by Garcia and Baitens. Welcome, hope you enjoy it. Throughout the video, different ways of assessing bilinguals will be described, while also pointing out the tension that is often present between the bilingual classroom and the monolingualism of most assessments. To do so, we will be covering the topics of assessment, development, and use, assessment of bilinguals, democratic assessment for bilinguals, and at the end of the presentation, some questions will be included for general discussion. So to begin with, assessment in the field of children bilingual education has been surrounded by several problems, since it mostly operates in monolingual educational systems. Even those that have benefited from extensive research support and official encouragement have almost relied on measurements designed from a monolingual normative perspective. Bilingual programs face the difficulty of assessing their students' learning proficiencies by not only taking into account the bilingual and cultural specific characteristics, but also by satisfying the criteria of a monolingual centralized assessment system. This occurs particularly when this assessment functions as a gatekeeper that controls the rate at which students progress to more advanced levels. In other words, bilingualism is often ignored since bilingual students' abilities and knowledge are assessed as if they were monolinguals. However, this is not only pertinent to bilingual education, but to education in general. According to Garcia and Baitens, testing is never neutral since it is a product and agent of ideological agendas. It is often under the control of official, national, or regional authorities, and furthermore, it is also based on specific cultural and pedagogical traditions. In line with this, Foucault's 1979 indicates that assessment is always a political act, a way to exercise power and control. But where does this power come from? In relation to this, Shohami explains that the power of tests comes from them being able to determine the future of individuals. Why? Because tests dominate curriculum, textbooks, and teaching. In other words, they dominate the general course of education. Another important element to consider is that assessment very often, rather than having educational purposes or pursuing language enhancement, they are mechanisms through which bureaucratic agendas are carried out, meaning that the focus are not longer the teacher or the learner or the classroom environment, but the purposes of higher stakeholders. Is the concept of assessment new? No, not at all. One of the first attestations of using this concept was employed in the Book of Judges through the word shibboleth, which was employed to separate or to sort out the conquered from the victorious. In the educational field, Marau's 1993 recounts how the Jesuits took the examination system to Europe precisely to control the school curricula in the classroom. So as you can see throughout history, this concept has been employed for different purposes, either to control, select, even punish, sort out, and label. And most importantly, to classify, or better say, to misclassify people according to their knowledge and abilities. Since intelligence testing methods were developed in the early 20th century by Alfred Binet, tests have been used to label and misclassify students, particularly those who are culturally and linguistically diverse. This means that the history of assessment has been entangled from the very beginning with racism and linguicism. Although the original aim of tests was to sort and rank students for purposes of comparison and placement, testing has been used and unfortunately continues to be used to allocate educational and employment benefits, rather than as a means for informing teaching and developing learning. And is there any difference between testing and assessment? Well, according to Glaser, testing and assessment are different, since testing focuses more on predicting success in learning and selecting and placing students, whereas assessment draws more attention to the measurement of the results of a learning course. However, in reality and in education, there is no difference between testing and assessment. Although there may be no difference between testing and assessment, Xiaomi differentiates between three different types of assessment purposes: formative, summative, and predictive. Formative enhances assessment for learning, meaning that this type of assessment happens during instruction while students are forming new knowledge, and it is typically short, frequent, and provides students with feedback that can help guide learning. This feedback is provided quickly so that students can correct themselves as they learn. Therefore, this type of assessment is process focused. The second one is summative, and just as the name suggests, this type of assessment examines the sum of student learning. Summative assessments provide stakeholders with information about student learning and performance, but provide little or no feedback. Summative assessments are often used to compare students to others or based on a specific standard. Therefore, its main characteristic is assessment of learning, in which it is indicated that the focus is the outcome and there is special emphasis on the attainment of knowledge from the students. Lastly, predictive assessment, as its name says, predicts the future performance of the test takers as a means to inform or to shape the instruction that will be provided subsequently. When assessing bilinguals, the difficulty in offering both fair and equitable assessment has to do with being able to understand the interrelationship between language proficiency and content proficiency, since both of them are important objectives in all testing. For example, language proficiency has been traditionally tested by focusing on discrete language skills, such as vocabulary and grammar. But it is also possible to test it through more holistic and authentic means, such as oral interviews, story retellings, picture cues, teacher observation checklists, portfolios, to mention some. On the other hand, content proficiency refers to whether the student has actually acquired understandings of the subject matter. Testing content proficiency independently of language proficiency is more complex than what it sounds. To avoid this, some institutions test bilingual students through using translations in their native language, or for deaf students by using sign language. However, Shepard 1996 states that a fair assessment framework should integrate two dimensions, both language proficiency and content proficiency. So, performance of bilinguals should be seen as a continuum that is related to language acquisition, so that the assessment should be adapted according to the place of the continuum in which the student is situated. Despite the difficulties that assessing bilinguals may comprise, it is important for all bilingual students to be included in all assessments. But in order for results to be equitable, bilingual students must be included in the design and the piloting of the assessments. Why? Because by doing so, the norming of the test will not be biased. And tests could also have both validity and reliability for bilingual students. For this, there are three aspects that need special emphasis because they really influence how bilingual assessment is enhanced. The first one is content bias. This occurs when the test reflects the language structure and shared knowledge of one culture, or the other way around, where no activities, words, or concepts from both of the worlds of bilingual students are taken into account. The second one is the purpose for doing it. The question here is, what is the reason for testing? Is it to sort the students, to promote them, to retain them? What is the purpose for doing so? An example of Why it is so important to determine the purpose is visible in the United States, where inadequate assessment has resulted in disproportionate assignment of bilinguals to lower curriculum tracks and over referral to special education classes. Perhaps it was not that they lacked knowledge, but the bilingual testing or assessment was not correctly implemented. The third one is scoring criteria. Why? It is very important to develop this criteria because it can differentiate between subject matter knowledge and abilities and the knowledge in which the students respond. In general, the main problem with assessment of bilinguals is directly linked to the increasing emphasis on the assessment of learning rather on the assessment for learning. The latter is evident in most standardized tests which are conducted as if students were monolinguals. However, we know that the child's home language is a strength that could be built upon not only to learn, but also to show what has been learned. Thus, there could be ways in which all assessment, including large-scale standardized assessment, could be done in bilingual ways. For example, students who are being educated bilingually could be assessed via a translanguaging mode, in which students are given the opportunity to use language A and language B in different contexts and for different purposes. For example, questions may be put in one language and responses requested in another. In this way, this translanguaging mode of assessment can give educators not only a better picture of what students really know, but would also offer a much clearer picture of students' languaging capacities. The second one is bilingual tap mode, which is a way of tapping home language practices in order to produce the target language. So rather than negating the student's bilingualism, this type of assessment would, for example, give instructions and questions in the child's home or sign language, and then ask students to respond only in their other language. Although it is rarely used, bilingual tap assessment holds much promise. The third one is performance-based mode. It has been shown that this type of assessment is better for bilingual students because they provide a wider range of opportunities to show what they know and what they can do in both languages and content areas. Furthermore, performance-based assessment also offers bilingual children different ways to display their knowledge and abilities, including drawing our multiple intelligences or different modes such as movement through dance and gestures, as well as visual or artistic renderings. Unfortunately, most bilingual students, even in the best bilingual education systems, are often asked to perform as two monolinguals. Many of these systems provide accommodations due to the little interest in developing appropriate bilingual assessment, as the ones previously described. An example of this is in the United States, in which, as a result of the No Child Left Behind Act of 2001, a number of accommodations have been implemented to test emerging bilinguals. These include the following. Presentation permits repetition, explanation, simplification, and test translations into students' home languages. And also, this can be administered by a bilingual specialist. Response, on the other hand, allows a student to detect their answers and to respond in their home language, as well as displaying knowledge using alternative forms of representation. Setting includes individual or small group administration of the test. This can be administered in different locations or in multiple sessions. Timing allows for additional time to complete the test or extra breaks during administration. Lastly, reinforcement permits the use of dictionaries and glossaries. Another accommodation that offsets the disadvantages that translation may have is transadaptation. This is developed and they are normed on the bilingual population that will be using them, and thus are much better versions than the translations. A transadaptive test works to eliminate cultural biases. However, the linguistic issues dealing with testing bilinguals with the monolingual test remain even when accommodations are implemented. Lastly, in relation to the democratic assessment for bilinguals, it is essential that flexible assessments be used with bilingual students. In other words, bilingual students should be given the opportunity to show their proficiency in both languages, both in the academic and the social context. The assessment of emerging bilinguals should focus on their progress over time towards established goals as established by Leslie Peterson and Rivera, 1994. Comparing tests of emerging bilinguals in the dominant language with those of monolinguals, and even with bilinguals at other points of the language continuum, is never fair. Therefore, authentic formative assessments are much better ways of obtaining valid and reliable information that can inform our teaching. To conclude, the authors posit a very strong argument. No area in bilingual education is in more need of development than that of bilingual assessment. If this is not achieved, bilingual children will never be able to demonstrate their strength. To conclude, these are the three questions I included for discussion. I would really like to know your thoughts about them. Feel free to select one or several. These are the references included throughout the video. Thank you very much for watching this video and for your attention. See you in the forum. Bye.